Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today to discuss, what challenges we've been hearing from our customers and seeing from, the market that's out there. In the modern, as more and more of these customers are taking a new modern approach with zero standing privileges across the hybrid enterprise and having meaningful, measurable impact on security. My name's Adam Barngrover. I lead advisory services practice here at Legion Star. With that, I would like to introduce our two panel members today. From Britive, we have Jay Klauser, and from Remediant, Brian Hanrahan. Jay, you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, thank you, Adam. Jay Klauser. I'm the director of solutions engineering as well as tech alliances at Britive. And just a quick little insight into Britive. Really, what we do is we try to empower our cloud infrastructure, our DevSecOps teams, as well as our security teams to really simplify access and authorization to the cloud, right? And we do this across infrastructure as a service, software as a service, and any other as a service you want to include there. But we start with visibility and reporting, but ultimately the exciting thing we do and what we're going to talk about today is provide our customers the ability to really adopt things like zero standing privilege through that just-in-time authorized access to resources and data. So really excited to have the opportunity to talk with you and Brian from the Remediant team and really dig into how that can help all of our customers establish that that leading framework.
Perfect, appreciate it. Brian.
Yeah, thanks for having us on today, Adam. I'm head of product at Remediant, and it's been a really rewarding role for me here. We work with a lot of customers that come to us in various states of, trouble with their privileged access, and we transform them from largely easy targets where attackers could get in and move laterally from on-premises, even the cloud and throughout their infrastructure, and we quickly get them to a much more defensible, resilient posture. And we're able to do that quickly. So for me, it's been, really a great journey watching real impact across our customer base. And looking forward to getting into the details of how Britive does this today across the cloud and how we do it on-prem and across, computers everywhere for that matter.
Awesome. I look forward to it. All right, guys. So often when the topic turns to this privileged access discussion, it inevitably starts with this concept of how do we stop the bad guys, okay? But in the real world, quite often, that same legitimate employee has this real meaningful need to have the same access that bad guy is trying to get access to, okay? So what I'd like to do today is kind of tell an age-old story of this, typical privileged user, right? And, one that most of our guests today will probably have heard or lived through multiple times. And then kind of have a collaborative discussion around, pros and cons to the old way approaching it and new modern ways approaching it the way your two organizations do, okay? So with that, what I want to start with here is this hypothetical user we have, okay? And let's kind of look at him as this person as that IT administrator, has responsibilities for managing a mix of cloud and on-prem infrastructure, applications, everything, right? He's that quintessential super user who might need privileged access to specific databases, to an individual console, or to SaaS infrastructure, or any other things, be it HR applications, financial applications, or SaaS applications, and even service accounts to all of the above, right? How is this person, how do we secure the access that this person has, this privileged, meaningful, really, really critical access? And what happens if this person's account or access is then compromised at that point? Someone puts the hoodie on and now they're the bad guy, okay? The idea that we're looking at this from is not having those standing privileges anymore and being able to take that access away, right? That the reason there's always that threat from those privileged super users and organizations tends to be that they're the target, they're the threat that we're looking at because they have that standing privilege. And we're going to talk through lots of different variations of how people have accomplished this in the past and how organizations typically go about this. But the overarching story, I think that we're going to see this trend throughout this conversation is that concept of going away from having that access and truly stopping those bad actors by moving to a more just-in-time perspective, right? I want to give this user access for just a given period of time and then take that access away when they're done, okay? So Jay, what I'd like to do is start with you. when we're talking about this type of user, who really is the super user here for all this access, quite often what we hear from our customers, for me anyways, is the concept of, hey, we've got these cloud infrastructure assets that I need to secure. I simply need to archive, vault, vault or secure those credentials at that standpoint. Right? What are the shortcomings you've seen in that approach?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Adam. I mean, ultimately, right, in the first place, no matter what, if you're just creating this God account or this broad admin account and vaulting it somewhere, ultimately, you still have an account that has these static permissions, these broad permissions. So that in and of itself is a risk. If that account, even if we lock it away in a vault, if somehow that vault gets compromised or that password rotation fails and an old password gets out and is still valid, we still have a risk, right? So that's just kind of always out there. But the interesting thing about the cloud that we're seeing is it's fundamentally different, I think, from an identity and access management and privilege access management space than some of the traditional kind of where a lot of the PAM solutions grew up. The cloud itself, in some cases, is ephemeral. And, resources get spun up and spun down. And this day, instead of actually troubleshooting an issue in a cloud service, it's just easier to tear it down and destroy it and spin up a new one through automation. So I think fundamentally cloud has kind of changed how access works. There's new concepts and even across these cloud services, AWS works fundamentally different than Azure and GCP, which work different than the SaaS solutions. Each one has developed its own identity and access management structure. And so that really makes it difficult to have a single solution, right, to meet all those needs. And that's really what at Britive we've tried to do, is kind of do all the hard work of figuring out how they all work and simplify that. But in the end, right, I mean, like I said, cloud is ephemeral. And then you layer on the challenge of non-human identities, which there's estimations anywhere I've heard from 6 to 40 times, 40 to 1, right? Who knows where it probably sits somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
But all of that makes it more difficult to kind of use that traditional option of let's just create an admin account, vault it away, and when we need it, kind of check it out, right? So new concepts, new challenges, but ultimately, right, the end state that we want to get to is zero standing privilege. So as you mentioned, right, we don't have the risk of this broad account, and not just give me the privilege of admin all the time, but actually let's be intelligent about what function I need to do at this time and give me the right privilege, the privilege I need to perform the function I need, rather than just saying, yep, let's give Jay God admin across the board every time he needs it. There's still, with just in time and zero standing permission, you really look at what you need at the moment and give them that. So.
No, I totally agree. If the resource is ephemeral, why should the access be any different, right?
Yep.
Right. Brian, if we're looking at this just-in-time model, right? So often people think of that and they hear that, they think of the requirement of I have to go request that access. If this is something that I legitimately need day to day on in my role, do I need to make those requests all the time, or is there some other solution to that approach?
Yeah, it's really, really critical to balance security and productivity, because if you don't do that in your environment, what happens is your population, who are these at-risk users, are going to work around the control. So rather than you maintaining the baseline that you thought, very quickly you drift back to broad privilege sprawl. And if there's nothing actively policing that, actively removing those privileges, then it means that you very quickly get back to where you started. I've got some direct anecdotes from my past experience where you can remove all the privilege and you wait 6 months and it plus some more will come back in the environment. And so you really have to be continuously enforcing. And in terms of why there has to get into the usability piece, if you think about the world from the perspective of an adversary, an attacker, going back to your slide earlier,
Mhm.
they're looking at the world through the eyes of your employees. And so if there's no impedance for your employee to get to all the systems that where they have standing or static privileges, then there's no impedance for your attacker to get to those systems either. So you have to strike a balance there where you want to rely on technologies that give you central control over the accounts like SSO, where you can disable accounts, create accounts, change passwords centrally. But you have to, when at the point where you're escalating to privilege or accessing sensitive resources, there has to be just enough friction there so that the attacker can easily waltz from one system to another, to the cloud, to the applications using the SSO, bypassing the authentication using the SSO. So the trick is to make it seamless as possible, integrating in with automation, DevOps workflows, ITSM, all the places where you can meet the user where they work, right? If they're requesting things through ITSM or processing change through ITSM, integrate there, make it seamless for them to get the access to the systems that they're going to need to work on. And that's really the goal, is make sure that you're working with the users and just providing the friction that's necessary to block the adversaries from getting to the same resource.
Really striking that balance of security with ease of use standpoint, right?
Absolutely.
Less friction, not friction less in that,
right.
To use another buzz term, right? You did mention something that I'd like to come back over to you with, Jay. When we start talking about SSO, conversation typically will also turn to authorization in that story as well. But in my mind, when we start looking at the Microsofts, the Oktas, the Pings of the world, that administrator of that SSO platform, that IDP, it tends to have a lot of parallels over to that traditional IT administrator as well, right? The administrator. So are you seeing those same sort of parallels, and what are the challenges you're seeing in that cloud world for you guys?
Yeah, no, it's a great point, right? Because ultimately, if you have super admin access or global administrator access, right? Super admin to Okta, global administrator to Azure, now you have another single account, right? That can now do things. They can create accounts, they can change policies, they can, do all these things. And so it is kind of the new area of focus to say, let's, especially for these accounts, let's separate out authentication, right? Okta, Azure, Ping, they're great at authentication, right? But we want to separate out authentication and authorization. And we've seen that use case time and time again, whether it's Azure Global Admin or Okta Super Admin. Britive, we built the ability to provide even those kind of high privileged roles just in time, right? And if necessary, when necessary, you have an additional authentication or an approval process. Because as you mentioned, right, Adam, I mean, when you look at, the keys to the kingdom, it's now these accounts, which are high value. You've kind of, in a lot of ways, broken down the traditional, obviously the traditional, castle and moat. So I no longer have my network as a protection for getting access to now these cloud services. And so it becomes more and more important that we're thoughtfully putting, practices and processes in place and kind of adding that defense in depth, if I want to go back to a tried and true term, right? And making sure that we separate out the authorization from the authentication. So yeah, it's absolutely kind of the new space we're seeing, and it applies to the IDPs, and it also applies to the SaaS solutions, the Snowflakes and the Salesforces and all these things where you kind of have just given these ultimate admin accounts across the board.
No, great point.
Yeah.
So really to kind of bring this part of that conversation kind of back together is that just in time, but being dynamic with that just in time access. So not just on off from everything account, but understanding what it is, what's appropriate, what's the authorization model look like for the access for these super users, okay? And have that be dynamic based on who they are, what role they're in, what function they're doing at that point in time, not just on and off, okay? So Brian, I'd like to kind of cut over to you, because one other thing I hear a lot, especially in that traditional PAM world, is, well, to segment our risk, we've just created another account that represents that access and that privileged access. And then we just lock that down and we're good, right? Any sort of challenges you've seen historically in that space?
Oh God, yeah. So I think people grossly misunderstand what they're accomplishing with these
Yep.
underscore A accounts. They think because they're using a different identity, it actually is solving a problem. Really, what you're doing is you're reducing the risk of an account, the exposure of an account,
Sure.
but you're not actually in any meaningful way changing the way an adversary looks at your environment and how they're able to attack the environment. So the idea is to really reduce the exposure and isolate those accounts from user activities, web browsing, email, the things that typically where malware or attackers come into your environment, and then reducing the time that the account's accessible by rotating its password from time to time. But the adversaries are focusing on collecting these underscore A credentials, these alternate account credentials from the systems where they're being used. And so if you think about the use pattern for these accounts, you got an IT operations person working from 9 to 5. Yeah, that's a joke. We know it's actually like 7 to 10, right? Working from like 9 to 5 every day, and the account's out in use, and every system they touch, they're leaving these credentials behind in a form that can be harvested by someone who's lying in wait on the platform. So once they pick up those credentials, they've bypassed authentication, touching back on what Jay said, and now they're really relying on authorizations. Once I've bypassed authentication, once I've got that session ticket, where can I go with it? And there are 100 different forms of session tickets, probably 5 really in use. 5 different forms of session tickets will say, we've Kerberos and JWTs and various different forms, but they all have one characteristic in common. It's a long-lived ticket that allows you to then authenticate to secondary platforms. And so once you're there, the attacker can move throughout the environment. So what you really accomplished with an A account is reducing the exposure of a credential, and that has some value. Sure. But there's actually a lot of, pain that comes with that too. If you implement it, usually to get that isolation and the reduced exposure, you're standing up jump boxes all over your environment. And so that's a couple things, expensive to operate, but also it's a pretty poor user experience. So you really need to think about those secondary accounts for what they are, which is reducing the window of exposure, but not really changing the game on an attacker who's trying to use that account to move through the environment.
Yeah, there's still standing privileges, even if it's somewhere else, right? Even if it's right now. And in some ways, it's almost worse because I may not look at that. I may not notice something if something's changed about it from an activity.
One thing to add on there too is that there's a connection, right? We're talking about cloud and the computer space ourselves, but there's where things come together is around Active Directory, and these underscore A accounts are often highly privileged in Active Directory, and very, very often your Oktas, your Pings, your Azures, your AWS are using roles from your Active Directory to allow privileges in different environments. So there's a very, very big connection. If you're into one of these underscore A accounts, it may not just be computers, it might also be your cloud and applications that someone's getting access into.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've seen that. Just to add on, I've seen that across the board, right? One of the things obviously we do is let's collect information about all of your accounts, groups, and privileges across your cloud services. And the dreaded -A account has definitely made its way into cloud as well. Brian, you're spot on, right? It's a known option, and so it's continued to kind of work its way into cloud services as well. So it's not just an Active Directory problem. It's a problem that continues to persevere throughout the cloud.
It's one risk surface in the end, right? It's like identity. That's the new risk surface that we're talking about.
It's everywhere, for sure. So Jay, I'd like to switch gears just a little bit here.
Sure.
When we start looking at the business user, less of that IT application administrator, right, or infrastructure administrator, but more into an application owner or a person. Like most common examples I see there are HR administrators or Salesforce administrators, where they need real privileged access, but they may not want all of that access to all of the data, right? Or they may need to restrict that. The biggest example I see, especially in the HR world, is I want to make sure I cannot gain access to all my peers' payroll information, right? How do you guys at Britive approach that problem?
Yeah, it's a good question, and you're right. I mean, really, in recent discussions, privileged access is kind of used to be associated with the admin accounts, right? Sure. But I think we're seeing that privileged access is really being associated with down to, in some cases, data level, or, even high risk accounts are starting to kind of be folded into how can we control these? And you're spot on, right? And back to Brian's point of it has to be user friendly. Trust me, if you get out, us admins, us tech guys, we're okay with a couple extra clicks. When it's a business user, it has to be really enough friction, but mostly, very little friction. But yeah, the same concept applies, right? The ability. I'll give you Salesforce, for example, right? I sit on the sales team, and I like to think having a security mindset, I'm relatively safe, but I know my sales guys, right? They're just out there, whatever they need to do, right? To whether it's getting contact information or looking across this data, they're probably over provisioned in some cases, at least the sales, world in general, where a salesperson probably doesn't need access to, support cases in Salesforce that might have debug logs with sensitive information about a customer's, environment, or, access to contracts. And so we're starting to see this idea that if you can provide access to that sensitive data or that confidential data just in time, it kind of falls in line with what we're talking about here. So day in and day out, as a salesperson, I can have access to my accounts and my contacts, my opportunities. And when I need access to things like, support cases, because maybe I want to, review those before I meet with a customer, or if I'm on the customer service team, right, I need access to a specific, customer's set of cases. That is, we're starting to see a desire to access that data just in time as well, right? Because again, there's risk with this broad set of data in solutions like Salesforce or Workday or, Snowflake, that, if that account gets compromised, now I've just compromised a large set of my employee data. But the reason I feel that data we were given access to that data broadly before is because there wasn't an option to do it just in time without interrupting the productivity of the person, right? So it's kind of back to Brian's point of, if you can make just in time accessible and relevant and easy to use, and that's what we aim to do at Britive, it'll actually be adopted and there's great business value from it. But if you make it too hard and you add too many workflows and too many approvals and all this stuff, it becomes a burden on the end user, and then it gets rejected, right? And like Brian's saying, they find a way around it. So it's that balance, but I'm absolutely seeing that, the ability to start control authorization just in time to data into fields, and into more business use cases rather than IT is certainly something that's, very relevant with discussions we've been having with customers and partners.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to add something, Brian? So I come off mute.
Yeah, I noticed that when you mentioned there, Jay, we think about that problem from a different perspective, where everyone thinks about the front door access to the data through the applications, and it's the backdoor access, where you can actually go at the operating system level to the databases, to the files that are behind and underneath, what your end users see. And that sort of access is really pernicious because it's pretty invisible in a lot of cases. And it's often, again, you can think about the A accounts, right? It's the A accounts that can get onto the systems and get to the databases, get to the files, and circumvent all the authorizations in the front. So the point is that you really do have to think about it from both directions, not one or the other, to really close things down.
Yep,
totally,
absolutely.
Totally agree. And for me, the big point here is that privilege is not just an IT function anymore, right? Privileged is anything beyond least privilege, right?
Yep.
Right. That's the idea. And even starting to get more dynamic there in terms of what are you doing at this instance? Or do you really need authorization to see this data? Just because you have it in general, do you have the need to have it right now, right? So Brian, I'd like to shift gears a little bit more again, right? And kind of go back toward, for lack of a better term, an older use case, right? When we start looking at the requirements for, hey, I need to install a piece of software, or something as mundane as I need to install a printer. People don't often think of this as a, stereotypical, sexy privileged access use case, but it's also still really, really vital. So I'd love to kind of hear your approach on this one.
Yeah, sure. And that's, the majority of the computers that are like, and it's probably shifting, but it used to be that the majority of the computers out there were laptops and workstations, and now it's thousands of ephemeral instances of servers in a lot of cases. But those end user use cases are really important. Most attacks in environments wind up in your SaaS applications and SaaS control plane and your servers and AD, but they're starting on those end user workstations. So it's really critical to make sure that your end users are not logging on every day with administrative permissions. And so we make that pretty usable. The operating systems themselves have nice privilege escalation mechanisms in them, where when you need to do a privileged task, it'll prompt you for the credentials. You've all seen this on your phones, on your Mac laptops. You go through the padlock, or you get the UIC prompt on Windows, or it says, is it okay for this thing to access your microphone? And for the ones that require admin permissions, it asks you for credentials. So combining that with just-in-time access behind the scenes, we can, when the user needs those credentials, very seamlessly put the credentials in place, the authorizations in place, I should say, so that the user can get through that operating system prompt, whether it's UAC on Windows or padlocks on Mac or sudo on Linux and Mac. It just makes it really seamless. And what's really important, again, thinking about user training and kind of just every corporate environment has a suite of different tools and products and ways of doing things, but the cross-cutting features are the operating system features. It's Windows, it's Mac 90% of the time. And people know how that works, and they know what those prompts are, they know what to do there. So we, again, meet the user where they are with the technology that they're familiar with, and we make it a very predictable experience where they know if I need elevation for this, I put the credentials in and I go. So there's very, very little user training, and using the native operating system capabilities, it's really seamless. The operating system can handle that. It handles all the use cases. That's exactly what it's there for. So it makes it pretty frictionless in the end.
I love that phrase, meet the end user where they are, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're not coming at it from that approach, it's this adversarial approach from the end user perspective, and that defeats the entire purpose of what we're trying to accomplish, right? Which is truly, find that correct balance and really increase security and lower risk.
Yeah.
So the next one here, guys, I'd love to throw it out to both of you, but Jay, I'm going to start with you. More often, I'm hearing more and more that it's, what's driving our adoption of a PAM solution is rising cyber insurance premiums, right? And I got to do something, right? I'd kind of love to hear, your take on that. But two sides of that, right? Hey, how have you seen, these sort of solutions helping that? But then also, is that a good thing, having those insurance companies drive this sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a relevant topic that we've seen and had a lot of discussions around. And I would even say, beyond even just PAM solutions, really, what we're talking about today is cybersecurity insurance companies are really driving customers towards just-in-time and zero-standing privilege. That is at the core of really what we're hearing is this proposal to have it be a requirement to even obtain a reasonable cybersecurity insurance premium. So it certainly is driving discussions for us, and really customers have started to come to us and say that they're now accelerating the process of implementing just-in-time and zero-standing privilege because one, they're seeing that it's going to make them obviously more secure and reduce their risk, but also because the cybersecurity companies are starting to require it. And the interesting thing is, I feel like the market is starting to catch up to the concept in some ways, right? I mean, probably in the past year, we've gone from, Britive has been educating customers in some cases about zero-standing privileges. It was kind of a new concept. And now we're starting to see where instead of us going out and educating, they're coming to us and saying, yes, I've got a project for zero-standing privileges or just-in-time. And that's really the shift I've seen. And I'm sure that the whole, cybersecurity, premium discussion has started to help accelerate that. At the same time, we're also seeing that, if we're trying to get more efficiency, and they're seeing just-in-time as a way to provide broader access to different employees and different resources in their in their company. Kind of in the past, there was a very few people who had these admin accounts, and there were a bit of a bottleneck in some cases because they would have to process everything would have to go through them. What we're seeing now is they didn't give broader access to these resources because in the past it was I had to give them static access or standing access or an admin account. Mm-hmm. Now with a solution like Britive and Remediant, right? And I'm seeing that they're saying, great, I can actually now give this other team access to do these different functions because I now have controls, and I know as soon as they're done that access is going to be removed, and I can put the proper controls and approvals in place before they actually take those actions. So, I'm seeing just in time kind of very relevant to cybersecurity, but also helping to drive efficiency and more, faster development in the cloud and faster adoption of the cloud as well.
For sure. Do you want to jump in there, Brian?
Yeah, I can echo everything that Jay said in terms of so I think the insurance companies, there's a pretty strong driver in having to pay out when companies are getting compromised. So I think that's driven them in the right direction, away from compliance-driven initiatives and to initiatives that actually make a difference in securing environments. So I think that's had a really positive effect on companies, the way companies are thinking about these problems, results-driven versus measurement, metrics-driven. So I think the steering has been really useful. And the other things that I would echo as well is that being able to accomplish this kind of project of addressing privileged access, whether it's on computers, on-premise or cloud, it's always been thought of as like a multi-year effort that's expensive, hard to get to, and kind of out of reach. And I think the new approach that we're talking about today gets you there a lot faster. And this is important because companies need to maintain their cyber insurance, and they're being driven by their own customers to have an adequate level of control as part of their own practices. So to know that you need to be in this security posture to be part of the supply chain of an aerospace or defense or finance or health services company, that's an important driver for them. And bringing that within reach for small and medium-sized companies that wouldn't be able to take on traditional approaches in any reasonable time frame, it's a really critical difference for us.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think it's really interesting to see that the insurance companies are driving organizations toward a positive result now. It's not the typical, historical norm there, right?
Yeah.
Always find that interesting. All right. So I'm gonna play devil's advocate for a second here, right? Jay, if for all these customers who are just moving to the cloud, right? I'm a medium-sized company. I've already made that investment in, lots of jump boxes and vaulting technologies from the big legacy PAM vendors. And they now have this offering that has been moved to the cloud, right? I'd love to hear your perspective on, the advantages of being cloud native versus being moved to the cloud. What are those disadvantages and therefore? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a great question, right? And I think you kind of there was a very subtle term used there, cloud native, right? I think there's a difference between a solution that probably has a whole lot of technical debt, kind of moving to the cloud as a hosted service, right? It's not truly built on the cloud native, using the microservices in that Britive aims to protect. I mean, first and foremost, we really understand how to build in the cloud and how to secure the cloud, right? We provide our own service out of the cloud, and it's cloud native, multi-tenant. And so I think there's just some inherent knowledge just in how to do that. It also stems, innovation, right? I mean, we're not bogged down and held back by, again, a lot of that technical debt of trying to, kind of do all the things we used to do, but do these new and exciting and innovative things. So, ultimately, I think what you find is with kind of the big legacy platforms is, they add capabilities that check a box and they're kind of the jack of all trades, master of none, right? That's a term we hear. Sure. So, I think as customers look at what's best for them, it's really looking at what business problem are you trying to solve, and pick the best technology and solution to solve that problem, not necessarily get bogged down with, I have something and they say they do it, so I'm going to try to force that solution to work, rather than really looking at what's making my business successful, right? Because the last thing, when you look at the reason that, companies are moving to and building on cloud native technologies, it's efficiency. It's trying to move their business forward and serve their customers better. And the last thing I would want to see a customer do is try to use a technology that maybe because it kind of checks a box and says it does something, but if it doesn't do it well and it's not, allowing your business to move forward and be productive and get the benefits of the cloud, I would say maybe it's time to take a step back and look at what solution could do that. Obviously, we think Britive is one of those, but by and large, right, make sure you're making decisions based off of what's best for your business and what really helps you move your agendas and grow your business and move it forward.
Absolutely, I'm with you. All right, Brian, similar situation, but my question is kind of the inverse now, right? From the standpoint of, if I'm that customer who's hard charging, moving to the cloud, why do I need to keep focusing on a modern, PAM solution for my on-prem resources that are ever shrinking?
Right. Well, I guess I don't even think about it through that same lens, to be honest. It's all computers in the end. It's, your computers, someone else's computers running in their data center, and wherever your workloads are running, they're running on primarily Windows and Linux for servers. And wherever you have software running on servers, you've got DevOps and developers and humans who need to connect to those servers and perform privileged tasks, to configure them, deploy software, update software, decommission them. And so the problem isn't going away, and all the work is still there. What's changing is that someone else is running the data center, and that allows the customer, to Jay's point, to focus on their business, which is not running data centers in most cases, but rather like their value add, their specific domain knowledge. And so we're helping customers continue to manage these problems of getting privileged access when, where, and exactly what's needed, while those workloads are transitioning from on-premise to cloud. So all of our customers, probably all of our customers, large percentage of them have mixed workloads in Azure, AWS, Google Cloud. They're running where they decide to run our software on premises, they can run it on premises or in the cloud. So again, we're able to meet them where they are in their journey. And it's important, I think, just keep in mind that the problems are not going away. We're reframing them to different operating modes of operation with cloud, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, but all the problems are still there and they still need to be managed, because the adversaries see the world as a single plane of what can they get to and how are they going to get to it. So if your employees can get to it, very likely the adversaries can. And so you have to keep your eye on the ball of where that problem's moving and how it's been reframed.
No, I totally
agree. And I'll just add to that.
I
mean, I think, Brian made a great point, right? In the end, it's all computers. And that's where I kind of see, where Britive and Remediant come together, and you look at a use case, right? If, we want to provide just-in-time access in Azure to a specific subscription down to a resource group, or an EC2 service in AWS to spin up the VM, right? That's where Britive comes in. We give that just-in-time access to manage the cloud infrastructure at that level, right? And we're laser focused. You kind of mentioned, why go with something like Britive? We're laser focused on being the best at just-in-time access to cloud resources and cloud processes and cloud workloads. But once that VM spun up, that's obviously where Remediant, comes in and provides that ongoing just-in-time access to manage that machine. And that's where I feel like when you look at solutions and companies like Britive and Remediant is, like I said, we're laser focused on being the best in what we do, right? And really pushing the envelope and making our customers successful. And that's where I kind of see that complete solution, coming together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And understand those questions were totally devil's advocate. I'm on the same page. My favorite expression is the cloud is just someone else's computer, right? Yeah. Because so many people don't even think about that. It's in the cloud. No, it's just on someone else's spinning plate, right? Yeah. All right. So you guys I love that concept of you guys both have, this is what we do. This is where we focus. And you both have a very similar, but very new approach in this space. But what I'd love to kind of talk with first through both of you, and Brian, I'm going to start with you, is what does this look like in practice? And what I mean by that is how long does it typically take for your customers to see that value? Not just, hey, I've installed the product, but I want value back from it.
Sure. Yeah, and the specific value that we think about is around the security of the environment.
Sure.
And so we're laser focused on understanding what the risks that are currently present are, and from a prioritized basis, reducing those risks. And so the way we go about it is we first ingest all the computers in the customer's environment. We synchronize with AD to get all the directory bound ones. We have APIs to ingest computers from other places. So it's easy to get all your computers in. Then we scan the computers, and we can scan many thousands of computers in hours, and then provide a comprehensive view of which of your accounts have privileged access to those computers. And in another very quick stroke, we can actually freeze the access as it is. So now you've stopped the bleed effectively. No new unauthorized access is getting into the environment. And so now you know which groups, which users have access where. We'll usually find domain admins. Sorry, still today, we usually find domain admins across all the computers. And so we look at which of those accounts are the most risky. Domain admins usually being number one on that list. And we very quickly move that from standing or static privilege to just-in-time access. So the domain admins can still get to all those systems, but now instead of it being the whole group being there, it's one user to one computer at a time, or 5 computers at a time that you need to work on. So that risk of the domain administrator getting compromised goes away pretty much instantly. And we work our way down that list over time. So within days, you can get to a point where you've scanned your computers and you've reduced the risk from these global domain accounts. And then you iteratively go through your risks in a prioritized basis and address the accounts as you go down that list. Never slipping backwards because everything's frozen, always moving forwards. And that allows you to do continual improvement and have visibility over time. So instead of 12 to 18 months and many consultants and a lot of consulting dollars, we can get this done very quickly in environments. We have had customers deploy us over a weekend while they're during a breach to actually shut things down, take control of their environment. So it's up to the customer how fast they want to go, and it can go very, very fast within days and hours.
I bet those were exciting weekends.
Yeah, unfortunately, I wasn't directly involved in those.
Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your perspective, yeah?
Yeah, it's always good when you get on the other side of it to have been part of it.
That's right. So Jay, I'd love to hear your response as well, right? How long does it typically take to see that value for a customer?
Yeah, I mean, very similar story with Britive, right? Being cloud native, 100% API driven, ultimately our time to value can be, a matter of hours, right? Connecting to, scanning, collecting information about these different cloud services, and then ultimately, similar to what Brian was saying, implementing, that zero standing privilege and that just-in-time access, taking the 20 or 30 Azure global admins you have and converting them to just-in-time in a matter of, hours. Same for, AWS and just across the board. So yeah, I mean, it really, I think there's this stigma with privilege access management that it's a never-ending, cycle. And there's certainly always, things you can do to improve it and expand it. But, much like Remediant with Britive, it's a value in a matter of hours, if in days at most, right? So very similar, right? Connect, scan, learn, identify what are the high-risk permissions accounts that are out there, and then convert those into a just-in-time model with that zero standing privileges, really the playbook, and it works really well. And again, it provides that super fast time to value. Even just the visibility alone, right, is very eye-opening most times. Kind of, you said, Brian, with the domain admins for Active Directory, the super admins in Okta and the org admins in GCP, you'd be surprised, how many times there's in in Azure, there's 40 or 50 tenant root group owners. I mean, this is the highest level privilege you can have. And it's just the easy buttons to throw them in there and let them do their thing. And, ultimately that's what we want to help customers realize, that, it's not difficult to actually turn that into just-in-time privileges.
Sure.
And it's not, going to remove and prevent the productivity that your users are having. And that's really, typically seen within a matter of days.
Awesome. It's it's interesting to hear that same age-old problem of, I don't know what I don't know out there, right? In the cloud or on-prem. It's still the same issue. So often it was the thought of, we're going to move to the cloud real fast and everything's going to be better, right? But I think so many of us moved so quickly, security was that afterthought, not the foundation, right? So it's still that same old problem, which is interesting, but the approach here is new, so I like. So really kind of what I want to come back to real quick is that concept of, and I'll have you guys jump in here, but I kind of created this little Venn diagram where you guys have a very new approach to meeting these age-old problems. And I'm not going to read through the whole slide, but the takeaways for me for all of this were, customers don't need this monolithic product set and stack to just meet all their security needs, right? We simply need to start removing that standing access and looking at it from that, dynamic authorization model perspective, giving you access for just that given period of time you need, right? And really going beyond anything beyond that least privilege is what we're defining as privileged at that point, right? And my biggest advice to customers are, have a new way of thinking about PAM and really leverage both Remediant and Britive, because it's that same approach, but they're very laser focused on what they're working. So I'll throw it over to each of you. Jay, I'll let you go first. Any sort of closing words you want to say to this slide or anything else we've discussed at this point?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, great summary. In the end, I truly feel, that zero standing privilege and just in time, I mean, they are going to be the de facto standard and the expectation in the future, and probably the not too distant future. We're seeing the trends, the cybersecurity insurance requirements we talked about earlier. There's, potentially new government, type of regulations. And so I think that, customers are starting to, and enterprises are starting to realize that. And so I think, now's the time to understand that and really start putting the framework in for that. And, as I said before, really at Britive, we want to ensure our customers are getting the benefits of the cloud, right? And part of that is being able to be agile and be able to be, move at the speed of cloud. That's a term that I know is kind of cheesy, but it's true, right? If you're not able to, develop and deploy and to gain the access you need securely, and you disrupt that productivity and the, we didn't get into DevOps too much today, but let me tell you, man, if you tell the DevOps guy I want to pull access back, they get a little fidgety, right? And it's because their KPIs are, how quickly can I put quality code out there? We need to start inserting that, how quickly can I securely put quality code out there? And that's really what we aim to do at Britive, right? Is we want to simplify security in the cloud and simplify the authorization and really turn, not just human, but the non-human tokens and secrets, turn those into dynamic access, because ultimately this is where I think the standard is going. And really just encourage customers to look at what solution is going to meet your business needs, not necessarily what solution do I own today.
Awesome. Brian, you want to close with anything?
Yeah, sure. I think, we see still that too many breaches are continuing to be caused due to excess standing privilege. And I think people have the idea that it's a problem that's out of reach or way more expensive and complicated than it needs to be. So we've helped at Remediant, we've helped a lot of customers already with a diverse range of businesses transform their security posture, so they're no longer easy targets once an attacker gets onto one of their workstations or laptops or servers. And we'd welcome the chance to work with more customers and kind of show them that there's an easier way that you actually can accomplish a really, really meaningful improvement in your security posture quickly. And there's a lot of kind of closing thought. There are a lot of companies out there that are talking about just-in-time access. And the thing that really makes a difference is making sure that you've got the hygiene part, the zero standing privilege taken care of. So that's what I want to leave you with is when you're thinking about this space, you have to think about why are you doing it? What's the end goal here? And what's actually accomplishing that end goal? And just-in-time access is the usability piece, critical, but zero standing privilege, that's actually the difference maker from the security perspective.
Awesome, awesome, thank you. So we got a few minutes left. I will open it up to the audience. If you guys have a question for either of our panelists or myself, pop those into the chat and we can field a few questions real quick, or we can, give a few minutes back in your day. I do see one. Okay. So how does that concept of just-in-time access map to zero trust, since that was kind of back to the name of the whole webinar and as at the beginning? So Jay, Brian, anybody want to jump on that one? Jay, you want to start?
Yeah, I don't mind jumping in, and then Brian, obviously, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. I mean, I think, when you look at just in time, that can be actually interpreted a few different ways. And there's a few different, just in time. In some cases, somebody could say, well, a vaulted account that I check out is just in time because I don't have, access, when I don't have that username and password. So, but in the end, we talked about it earlier, there's still kind of that standing privilege and risk there. I think that when you look at just in time and how it truly kind of fits within a zero trust framework, Brian just mentioned it. It's really getting to that zero standing privilege, meaning there is no privilege and the privilege doesn't exist whenever until I need it, and then it goes away. So that's very much in line with zero trust. To try to look back at zero trust, and you talk about, from a network perspective, the data plane and the control plane, it's almost like that authorization, that just-in-time authorization is the control plane, right? Just because I can authenticate into a system, that's kind of my data plane, my access. Now I need the control plane to authorize it. And that's really zero standing privileges, and how I kind of see some zero trust purists would probably question me on that analogy, but that's kind of where I see the, how it fits into the zero trust, framework and program.
I would agree. It's that first step, right? It's that first step is removing those standing privileges. So we know we're starting at that baseline.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's I'd repeat a lot of what Jay said, so I'll try not to. The way I think about it is the objective of zero trust is to really make sure that every connection to every application or system is authenticated and authorized. In other words, it's only like very, very specific and real-time connectivity to systems. And I think when you think practically about what that amounts to is that you're still going to have a component of single sign-on into the zero trust ecosystem, and you'll still have standing authorizations throughout that ecosystem. And so without actually a way to authorize connections just in time to systems, you still wind up with the ability for an adversary to compromise an identity, in other words, bypass authentication, and then be able to, with that identity, be able to interact with all the resources that they have access to. So like everything else, I think you have to think about it from a defense in depth perspective. When I think about zero trust, the way it's been envisioned so far, it seems to really be addressing some of the network security factors and not so much the authorization at the resource itself. And so when I think about zero trust, I think it's going to evolve over time to incorporate this idea of zero standing privilege and really dynamic authorization, just-in-time access and dynamic authorization to get to the workloads, whether it's an application or an operating system or a database or network device.
Awesome. I could not agree.
They go together, they mesh together for me.
They really do. It's all part of the same, right? All right, so that looks, I don't see any other questions coming in. So we are almost at the top of the hour. So I'm gonna wrap up.